Welcome to the HR on the Offensive podcast, brought to you by Lace Partners. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the latest HR on the Offensive podcast. It's me, Chris Howard from Lace Partners, joining you as always, and we thank you for joining us for the latest of our podcasts. Today, we are going to be talking about AI, but we're going to be doing it through the lens of our campaign that we've been running. Now, the campaign, if you're a regular listener, you already know this, but the campaign is focused around, it's called Becoming Skills Powered. You can find it on the Lace Partners website, which is www.lacepartners.co.uk/skills. That'll give you all of the different bits of content that we've put together. But what we thought we'd do today is look at the impact of AI as a concept and tools and things like that, and how it is going to impact organizations in the way in which they are looking at becoming skills powered, driving skills based organizations. To do that, we've got a psychologist. We've got Ben Williams, who is a founder and MD of an organization called Sten10. How are you doing, Ben? You all right?
Very well, thank you. Yeah, raring to go. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you on, and I need some partners in crime to turn this into a nice chat rather than just me interview you and fire questions at you. So I've got the fabulous Aaron Lynch joining me. How you doing, mate? You all right?
I'm very well, thank you, Chris. Happy to be back.
Good to have you on. Good to have you on. And of course, no AI-related pod is complete without the man, the myth, the legend, Charlie Frost. How you doing? You all right?
Really good, Chris. Pleasure as always.
Yeah, good to have you on. So we're going to get stuck into some questions. We're going to ask Ben some questions. We're going to give some of our own thoughts as well. But before we do anything else, it's fundamentally different question time. We're going to give Ben a few seconds to compose his answer. So I'm going to pick on Aaron Lynch first, then Charlie, and then Ben can give his answer to this. But today's fundamentally different question is related to a news article that I read. At the time of us recording, it is Halloween, and there was a cyclist that went onto the Strava app and he mapped out and cycled a route, which then, when you look at it on a map view, looked like a skeleton. So, Aaron Lynch, if you've got your Strava app, you can choose whether you want to cycle or run. What image or what picture, and it doesn't have to be Halloween related, what picture would you map out?
Well, I think I'm taking the bike, Chris, because I'm not much of a runner. And I was thinking something a little bit old school gaming. So maybe like Crash Bandicoot, the image of Crash Bandicoot, maybe. What do you think about that?
I like that. It sounds blooming complex though, mate. I bet you'd have to be doing cycling lots of different directions. For me personally, I'd keep it nice and simple. I would have just copped out and said a sword. Just go up one road, come down the next road, go across, down. That would have been one I've gone for. But Aaron's gone for complex. I like it. Charlie, are you going to up your game compared to Aaron there, or are you going to cop out like me?
I've gone on the absolute opposite end of the spectrum. Actually, it's inspired by, I think someone at Lace previously did this. You might remember Chris Dion during COVID spelled out the word lace when he was away in Greece. So I would copy that purely out of simplicity and laziness, that I wouldn't want to be running up and down, going back on myself. But
I love that.
Response.
I love that. Very on brand as well. As the marketing bod on this podcast, very pleased that you went on brand. Ben?
It's a very timely question because this past Sunday, I was supposed to be running my first ever half marathon, the Beachy Head half marathon. But it was supposed to be after months of intensive preparation, toning the mind, body and spirit, and I didn't do any of that. So I actually ducked out of it. So if I were to have a chance to do it again, I'd probably either something inspirational like "I did it!" ! Or, I don't know, fail in acknowledgement of last weekend.
I quite like that. And the irony as well of running on Strava and getting fail when actually you've then probably run quite a long distance to then write the word out fail. I quite like that. That's brilliant. Okay. Right. Shall we get into the detail of how AI could potentially impact organizations becoming skills powered? I'm going to use a podcaster's host prerogative by firing the first question and getting your thoughts, Ben, and then I'll get one of the gents to chip in. Let's start with a nice sort of simple sort of overarching one, really, which is just kind of your view, Ben, on how AI is going to impact like the skills of professionals in the future. Like, what are the types of roles that you think we might see that will lend themselves to the fact that we are rapidly hurtling towards a life in which a lot of organizations and businesses, particularly those white collar ones, are utilizing AI in most facets of the work that they do?
That's a simple one. Yes, no, I think that's a really good question. I mean, I think what I tend to talk about is the distinction between AI being used to automate and AI being used to augment. And I think a lot of the conversation to date has been around how AI and technology more broadly can be used to automate tasks that were previously performed by humans in a strive for greater efficiency. I guess there's a bit of a number of reasons why the conversation is trying to move more towards the realm of augmentation now. But that's where essentially AI is used to enhance the tasks that humans perform rather than replacing humans from the loop entirely. This actually, from a organizational change perspective, is far more palatable for workers, unsurprisingly, when they find out that actually they can achieve far more in the time they have available and actually perhaps do the more exciting stuff if you can augment their role with some of the more repetitive things. In terms of the types of psychological characteristics that might be affected by the introduction of AI, I can talk a lot about what some of our thinking is at the moment, but essentially it clusters around thinking skills and how they're going to change, personality, motivation, and knowledge. And I can dive into those into more detail as you would like. But yes, that's broadly, it's this debate between, is it going to be used to replace huge chunks of our roles, if not entire roles, or is it going to be more used to augment? And the shift now is more towards thinking intelligently about how it can be used to augment people's roles.
That's a really interesting point. And something that I've been thinking about is around how the employees, in the sense, or what skills would they require and able to kind of facilitate that augmentation? Is there anything that comes to mind when, in terms of kind of hard skills or technical skills, that you would imagine organizations could start upskilling their employees on to kind of facilitate that process of help getting support through AI augmentation?
Yeah, so there's a lot of talk about what are the psychological predictors of success in AI usage at the moment. Some people say, well, actually, it's as simple as learning agility and open-mindedness from a personality trait perspective, so a willingness to learn new technology and new techniques. We've actually developed a more involved model of AI usage, specifically around generative AI usage. So we've developed a tool called Promptability that looks at people's thoughts, feelings, and general attitude towards AI in the first place, because some people have a very negative outlook, and being able to identify that and helping to dispel untrue myths, but also kind of reassure about the positives, I think is perhaps the first step. Then knowing about the way in which to interrogate AI for the best outcomes. So we have a bit of a circular model, which is around preparing the information that you need to feed into the generative AI, for example, model. So being clear on what your purpose is from your interrogation, who the audience of the output is going to be, and what resources you need to feed in. To then crafting your prompt. So saying, well, look, are we including enough context? Are we using precise, concise language? Are we using specific prompt engineering techniques? And there's a whole range of them that you can learn about to get better outcomes. I think my favorite is asking ChatGPT to pretend that it's Mr. Spock helps it to do better at logical reasoning problems than if you just ask it in the raw. So some of this way, we're kind of finding our way a little bit. Some of it does kind of make a lot of sense intuitively. And then finally, I think people need to have a critical eye, perhaps more than usual. So they need to ensure that the output they receive is accurate, error-free, unbiased, ethical, and then take an iterative approach in refining it as well. People that I've worked with around this, prompt engineers, essentially say that to use these types of tools, you need to know what the right answer is. This is just going to help you get there quicker and make sure that you're very holistic in your understanding. So you need to have that critical eye at the end rather than just accepting it as gospel unquestioningly.
I really like that. I also really like overall the point you made about the augmentation piece and shifting that mindset. I think linking it a bit more to the skills-based organization piece, from your perspective, how can AI help to level the playing field when it comes to competencies for workers? I think one of the areas I quite like in this is the idea that AI can help to lower some of the barriers to employees being able to upskill or also be able to move throughout the organization. But it'd be great to get some of your thoughts from your experience and perspective.
Yeah, I think this is probably one of the most exciting consequences of integrating AI within organizations. It's also, from a psychological perspective, one of the most terrifying for me as a professional that deals in assessing people's individual differences, because some of the research so far has shown how AI can really even out the bump between high performers and low performers, and it actually has a disproportionate effect on those who were previously perhaps rated as below average. Their performance is increased significantly more than those that were already high performers. I was working with a student the other day who had always, in her email communications to me, come across as highly professional, very structured, very clear, but we were working live alongside each other for the first time, and I was looking at some of her raw notes, and I was thinking, oh wow, these are a little bit not quite what I'm used to here. But what she said to me is that she always feeds them through ChatGPT before she sends an email or anything, and says, write this as a professional, well-crafted, concise, with the key points summarized. And you couldn't have told. So I think it is a real leveler. And if you think about not just for let's say with disabilities, so people, let's say if you needed to proofread your the work that you produce, if let's say you have dyslexia, for example, then that can be a great leveler. But also on things like just general personality traits. So I have seen plugins to email clients where you can click and it will say, make this more persuasive or make this more impactful. And it will just do this at a click of a button. So I think this idea of democratizing competence, allowing everyone a chance to perform on a level playing field, is really good from an inclusion and diversity perspective. Where I worry is, does it then become less important to measure differences between people if AI has evened out those bumps? Because that's my job, is to measure differences between people.
This is really interesting. I'd like to explore this a little bit more, if that's all right, because there's a couple of things that popped into my head. So I'm going to probably do a minute of like monologuing and then I'll tell you to pick the bones out of it. But so the first thing that made me think about was if you're an L&D team, for example, and you're thinking about, okay, so what are the types of skills that we need to embed within our organization to meet our business objectives? Does the fact that AI can level that playing field, as Charlie said, and as you've said, mean that their programs almost and what they're having to try and upskill the rest of the business on, it leans more towards this kind of softer side, do you think? So are you looking at L&D teams who maybe traditionally would have had, right, we've got a bank of different learning tools, online tools that we are emphasizing around maybe technical skills, but now we're going to have to shift that because ultimately AI is going to take away a lot of those elements? Then I start to think about, does that even, this might be going a bit meta now, so just rein me in if needed, does that then impact the way in which education systems work? Are schools going to have to start thinking about, right, well, we're no longer training you for certain technical areas because AI is going to do some of the heavy lifting in that response. And so the way in which people enter the workforce, and maybe there's something around like the candidate experience side that we can touch on as well, the way in which people enter the workforce needs to change, because the things that they need to be good at is no longer that, right, well, I'm good at this technical thing, I can do this because, you know, I'm brilliant at writing code, but AI can actually now do that for me. What do you think? Like that might have been a bit meta there, going into the whole fundamental way the education system is now going to change. So, can you give me some thoughts on that? And then I'd be interested to get Charlie and Aaron's thoughts as well, if you guys want to layer on.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is a slow progression from perhaps being able to carry around an abacus in your pocket up to then a calculator, to then Excel, to then the internet, and now AI that essentially has, I mean, the internet has the sum total of all world's knowledge pretty much contained within it and within your pocket, but it can be a bit of a faff to navigate. But with an intelligent AI by your side, especially as it becomes more intuitive to interact with them. So actually just being able to ask your question and getting a really thoughtful, considered response in reply, it makes it so much easier. And I think in terms of education, we might not crack that one on this podcast, but I know that there is a huge amount of concern about how do we go about grappling with AI's usage. And I think at the moment, a lot of the talk is around defensiveness. So when I was talking to a teacher the other week that was saying as their students complete long-term written assignments, they actually have a system where it takes a time-stamped copy of their drafts so that the teacher can make sure that their thinking has developed over time rather than just put it into ChatGPT with like 5 minutes to go. So they want to see that development of thought over time. But there is that more fundamental question that to what extent is that important? Actually, if you can get a really good response from not spending 3 months of iterative thought over it, but just having some intelligent interrogative questions, is that what we should be assessing? So I think that is a fundamental question as to what's education for. And yeah, maybe I'll just see what Charlie's got to say on that point as well.
I think we could probably do a whole other podcast on the education piece. But I think focusing in on the L&D side, I think in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of focus on upskilling and reskilling, especially now that AI has come in. I think we're likely to see a lot more conversation shifting further to continuous learning and continuous skilling, because the lifespan of skills, and this is something talked about in the campaign, is shrinking rapidly. So how do organizations grapple with the need to continuously reskill rather than just looking at we need to upskill currently and reskill maybe people who are lacking some of the kind of skills that have come in recently? One of the angles I think on that is that obviously you can look at it, the AI is the driver or kind of the cause of this change. But I also think there's a viewpoint that AI is a great enabler of being able to do that previously organizations didn't have the tech and the manpower, the resources to be able to actually continuously reskill their organizations, because you previously needed to just scale headcount within an L&D function. But actually, because of the opportunities from AI tools, that can actually be an enabler of being able to reskill your organization at a faster pace and keep pace with the rate of change.
I was going to say that there's a lot of talk about the assessment of skills in a recruitment context, and a bit of a feeling that you're on an ever-moving escalator going in the wrong direction. Like, as skills shelf life is only like a couple of years tops, like, are you in this continuous battle to have this accurate picture of the current skills profile of your organization? What some organizations are now focusing upon, instead of assessing skills enablers, so the raw building blocks of acquiring new skills, so things like curiosity, openness to experience, a little bit of cognitive horsepower, so being able to take on new things. And actually, if that's in place, then you've future-proofed your skills acquisition capability for the future, even if you haven't actually measured the skills themselves.
And what kind of level of maturity is that in at the moment in terms of the AI's ability to assess soft skills, and how accurate are you seeing that the outcomes of those assessments?
So the use of AI in assessments themselves, it's an interesting one as to what you define AI as. So for decades, we have had computer-generated personality profiles, for example, that you could say are a form of artificial intelligence, because they're acting instead of a human and telling you this person is more or less suited to these types of tasks. The skills enablers question was raised by a company called Arctic Shores, who call themselves a behavior-based assessment company. And it's essentially by getting people to complete these tasks that are a little bit like a computer game, and taking a lot of data from how you played that game or how you completed those tasks, and correlating with what they know it predicts. So, for example, if you're in a particularly challenging task, it will say, well, if you persist with this challenging task, despite it getting more and more frustrating, that's likely to translate into persistence in the workplace. And that way of assessing people is perhaps another step forward in terms of the amount of data that it gathers, and also its ability to withstand cheating from AI methods. I think if you go to the next step, AI has been used to do things like interpret people's personality profiles from their facial movements. And actually, there's been reasonable success in doing that, but it's not very popular with candidates. So they don't like the idea that a webcam is going to be recording every facial twitch and measuring your level of neuroticism and using that to decide if you get a job or not. So it's one of those things. I'm not sure if that's from Star Trek or Star Wars, but just because we could, we didn't stop to think whether we should. So it might be technically possible to assess personality from facial twitches, but you've got to think about the unintended consequences in terms of the candidate experience and whether they actually enjoy it.
Yeah, I think that's really, really interesting. I think the candidate screening process, in the run up to this podcast, we had a conversation around the different types of ways in which the candidate screening process or the candidate experience might evolve. Are there any other kind of bits that maybe you've kind of seen or touched on that maybe we talked about before, like the AI's role in impacting how a candidate goes through that journey from, and we were talking about it, I've just left school, or no, I'm looking for my first role, or even I'm a few years into the role, kind of, are there any bits and nuggets that you could give us about how you think that candidate screening process is going to evolve? And you gave just some great examples there, but I just wondered if there's any other bits that are worth chatting about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm less involved in the broader candidate experience, but I know that, for example, the use of AI chatbots to keep people warm throughout the process is something that's still got a lot of traction. I think probably the thing that I'm most interested in is giving people real value back from the assessment process by having AI-powered reporting. So having a static personality report that says, you like socializing slightly more than most people is fine. But actually, if you can plug it in and said you were applying for a job as a entry-level banker at such and such a bank based in this geographic location with this set of responsibilities, then you're not just telling someone you like interacting with others more than most, but you can say, actually, this could be an asset for you within a banking environment because of X, Y, Z. However, your other scale, where it said that maybe you're less focused on basing your decisions on numbers as opposed to intuition and gut feel, that could counteract some of that. So we can give a really thoughtful, considered response contextually that could help either if the candidate's unsuccessful, so they say, actually, I really got something from that experience, thank you, and being an advocate for the brand, or for onboarding, so actually they hit the ground running and they've got a really nice onboarding plan based upon their personality profile that current methods just don't offer.
Interesting. Really, really interesting. You've put together, again, a little bit of behind the curtain for the listener here. We obviously do a little bit of pre-prep, and you showed us a few slides of some of the bits that you've been working on, Ben. And one of the things you talked about was your new most important competency. How do you think that's going to impact organizations when they look at being skills-based?
Yeah, I mean, I think the new most important competency is essentially your appetite and aptitude for interacting with AI. I think in a world where personality differences matter less because AI can smooth that out, where reasoning and knowledge matter less because AI can smooth that out, that it is going to come down to your willingness and your capacity to engage with AI-powered solutions. How's it going to affect the skills-based organizations or organizations that are moving more towards a skills-based approach? I think that comes down a little bit to how you're defining a skills-based organization. So in some contexts, it's basically saying, let's move away from hiring based upon past experience and qualifications and move towards the fundamental building blocks of what's important in the job. And in that instance, I think it's a case of really challenging yourself when you're putting together a selection process to say, is that really still important? Is that how the job really still works, given the new world in which we're operating in? An example, actually this is more in a development context, but I used to run negotiation skills training for a long time for a major UK supermarket. And a lot of those negotiations were done in person or over the phone, live in real time. And it was really important that people had certain personality traits to be able to do that effectively, to open strongly, to trade concessions, to be quite assertive. So if that's what you've always assessed against, those kinds of qualities, I think selection processes, development programs all need a refresh, a relook at in light of where AI is being used to augment people's performance. So actually, if negotiations are now conducted more at a distance, and they're actually done more using kind of AI to craft your emails and your responses and your proposals, there's a lot of AI-powered proposal writers out there at the moment, then actually, are those personality traits still relevant? And actually, is what you should be assessing is these kind of skills enablers, the propensity to say, actually, I will engage with new technologies, I will take them on board, learn them. And also, I think it's probably giving people a realistic job preview. I mean, that's a lot of the work that we do, is to design assessments that allow the candidate to make an informed judgment. Would I like working in that environment? Would I enjoy having those parts of the job done by AI and these parts of the job left for me? Is that motivating, or actually is that less of a good fit? So I think that's going to be important to giving people a preview.
Quick one, Ben. Really interested to hear about the kind of those criteria you mentioned earlier in terms of what some of the kind of traits are that people that might be best placed to take advantage of AI augmentation. And just thinking about those, being curious, being persistent, etc. Do you find in your experience those are traits that can be influenced or kind of they can change over time, or are they quite fixed at an individual level, do you think?
It's a really good question. I think the traits themselves are going to be relatively fixed over a fairly long time period. But often what we do is separate out the underlying trait from the behavior that results from it. So let's say curiosity. You might naturally not be the most curious person in the world about new technologies, but how could we encourage that behavior in people? Well, a lot of the time it's thinking, well, what's going to motivate that behavior in people? So actually, if you have a really strong driver for career progression, then actually you may well seek out new AI tools if that's going to be linked to achieving that promotion. Or if you want to, I don't know, you really like innovation, then actually sorry, that's probably the same kind of thing as curiosity. But I don't know, let's say you like collaboration, then there might be new AI collaboration tools that actually enable you to do that. So that means you will explore and engage in it. So yeah, I think it's probably finding ways to incentivize the behavior. And this is where related fields like behavioral science come in, like nudge theory. I was speaking to a behavioral scientist who comes from the world of advertising previously about how you entice people to buy products almost unconsciously without thinking of it. And I think thinking of ways in which you can nudge people into AI use almost without them realizing they've slipped into using it, I think is really good. And this is where some of the organizations I'm talking to try to embed it in existing software rather than saying you need to use this separate window for that, a separate window for that, a separate window for the other. So integrate it into your daily life so it's frictionless, as it were, rather than it being something that you need to consciously make an effort to use.
Based off that, then, I guess that suggests that the onus is almost more or less on the organization to understand how to kind of improve those or incentivize those characteristics within their employees. So how would they go about doing that? Obviously, you've mentioned some great examples there in terms of linking that to career development, or but I guess something that might be quite challenging for some people if they're not particularly invested in that area. Is there anything that you've come across that can kind of support and help them develop those skills?
I think we're still in really early days. So one of the most forward-looking organizations I'm working with who's going through an AI transformation project is just simply at the moment starting out with a lot of surveys. So asking people, what's your current attitude towards AI? What are the barriers exist? Why aren't you currently using it when you could be using it? So trying to find out en masse what the overall trends are. And I think that's a really helpful first step. And then you might go on to more tailored interventions on an individual basis as needed, because again, not everyone's motivations are going to be the same. It's not like a sheep dip. You are going to need to find what's the button that's going to flick someone into AI usage on an individual basis at some point.
Yeah, I mean, this is annoying because we're just out of time, but I feel like I've got about 10 questions that I want to ask, because I think that was a really fantastic discussion. It might be worth us unpicking in future. And I love the idea that AI can actually empower people to take, and this is kind of what Charlie, you were talking about as well, like empowering people in terms of their learning and continuous improvement. It's like, what are the areas that I need to focus on to get to the position or the type of job that I want to do? Or what are the things that I need to focus on that just make me enjoy my job a little bit more? So it has a lot of implications on how, and organizations as well can help to facilitate and fast track that. Previously, 15, 20 years ago, it's what do you need to learn? Go onto this portal, watch a load of videos, and away you go. Whereas now it's a lot more intuitive and it can be personalized as well. So I think that's quite fascinating. But I'm going to wrap up with just one final question for you, Ben. If we're having this podcast in 12 months' time, what are we talking about when it comes to how AI is impacting organizations, when it comes to this idea of becoming skills powered?
I think that we will be talking about the types of new roles that have been created and how we go about defining them. So things like an AI ethics officer could be the type of new role that we're going to need to write job descriptions for and decide where do they sit in the organization. I think also, I mean, what I'm seeing, I alluded to earlier, is the ease with which we interact with AI improving. So I use ChatGPT on my mobile more than I use it on my desktop because I can talk to it and it will give me the answer in verbal form. We haven't quite got to the stage where we've got C3PO standing by our side answering all of our questions, but it's not far off. We'll have a little widget that will be like a really bright co-worker that's just sitting to our side. And I think then you get into all sorts of interesting areas about trust, and there's a lot of research about how humans build trust with robots that I think are quite applicable to AI as well, and what happens when that trust is broken and how do we rebuild it.
As I said, I think we could probably explore this all day, but we are on time for today. I'm going to say thank you very much, Ben, for joining us. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Thank you, Chris.
And my partners in crime, Aaron, good to have you on again, mate.
Thank you. And thank you, Ben.
And last but by no means least, I'm sure he's got an eye on that AI ethics officer role at Lace Partners, Charlie Frost. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris. And thank you, Ben. Yeah, hopefully we can do this again soon.
Yeah, and we will definitely get Ben on because I think there's lots of topics that can spin off from this. Hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast as much as we've enjoyed recording it. There's a whole host of, I mentioned the skills powered campaign. Of course, we've got pods, we've got blogs, we've got videos. We're doing a couple of events at the moment at the time of recording, and we'll be doing that into the new year as well. So there's lots of great information around becoming skills powered. And also we've done a number of different discussion topics around AI as well, not specifically relating to skills. Charlie's done an interesting live stream where we talked about the legislation that the EU has gone through. So there's lots of bits for you to unpick. If you want to, you can go on to lacepartners.co.uk/insights. Apart from myself, from Aaron, from Charlie and Ben, thank you very much for listening. And hopefully we'll catch you next time on the HR on the Offensive podcast. Bye-bye.